Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the creaking leather boots of someone you definitely wouldn't want to be. Unless you have a weird thing for pestilence, leeches, and body odor. That's right, we're following you. The unfortunate soul who wakes up in 1347 with a job title that sounds impressive until you realize it mostly means standing near dying people and hoping not to join them. Welcome to the grim, chaotic, and vaguely onion-scented world of the medieval plague doctor. You shuffle down a narrow cobblestone alleyway, the hem of your waxed cloak dragging through something. Moist. The sun hasn't even risen yet, but the town already smells like yesterday's meat stew turned vengeful. Rats dart across your path, twitching with fleas that have more power over human history than any king or pope. You pause, nose crinkling beneath your ridiculous bird mask, and try not to think about how warm it's getting inside there. You've barely begun your rounds, and your only medical degree is a mix of superstition, trial and error, and a pamphlet written in Latin you only half understand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere exotic or just curled up in a familiar bed, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you feel every morning is dread. Not just existential dread, but the kind that settles into your lungs like damp smoke. People are dying in the hundreds, and most think it's because of divine punishment, planetary misalignment, or the town baker's suspicious cough. You, however, are the so-called expert. Your job is to walk straight into this chaos with a stick, a snazzy black outfit, and a mask that makes you look like a particularly menacing goose. The irony is you took this job for the money. The town council hired you because their local barber surgeon ran away screaming after his third patient exploded in pustules. They offered you room, board, and a generous monthly stipend, paid in advance. You didn't think too hard before saying yes. You probably should have. When you accepted, you imagined something noble, healing the sick, being cheered by grateful families. Instead, the moment you stepped off your cart, someone spat at your feet and muttered something about cursed birds. You've been dodging flying chamber pots and suspicious stares ever since. You walk past a bakery where the smell of burnt bread almost, but not quite, masks the ever-present stench of rot. A child peers at you from behind a shutter, eyes wide with a fear you've seen too many times. They don't see a hero. They see a walking omen. You pause at a boarded-up door marked with a red X. That's the medieval version of "do not enter." You do anyway. Inside, the silence hits first, then the buzzing, always the flies. A woman lies on a straw mat, pale and still. Her face is bloated, her lips blue. You don't even need to get close to know she's gone. In the corner, a man coughs violently, his skin shiny with sweat. He reaches toward you, eyes pleading. You take a step back. His fingertips are black. You pull out your stick, not to help, but to keep him at a distance. That's protocol. Poke, don't touch. Maybe you give him a cloth soaked in rose water. Maybe you mumble a prayer. You definitely don't expect him to live. Historians still argue whether these early plague doctors ever actually helped patients survive. Most agree they were more symbolic than practical. A sort of walking reassurance that the town was doing something, even if that something was waving incense and applying onion poultices. Back outside, you note the time. Sun's fully up now, and you have 6 more houses to visit before you even get breakfast. Which, by the way, will probably be a piece of dry bread and some watery ale. Luxury dining, plague doctor style. You wonder again how this all started. People say it came from the east, Some whisper about cursed ships in Sicilian ports. Others blame the stars. One elderly priest insists it's because women are showing their ankles. Whatever the cause, it spreads fast. Faster than your reputation as someone who occasionally shows up too late. Quirky tidbit. Some towns in Germany actually rang bells when the plague doctor walked by, like you were some kind of undead ice cream cart. Kids would peek through their fingers and dare each other to touch your shadow. You're basically folklore, and not the cozy kind. You turn a corner and spot another one of you, a fellow doctor in a longer beak mask and finer gloves. You nod at each other like two airline pilots passing in a terminal, except your flights often crash and burn. You exchange news. The mayor's daughter is sick. The abbey lost 4 monks. The gravediggers are demanding double pay. By mid-morning, you're sweaty. Your boots are caked in something awful, and your soul feels about 6 pounds heavier. And still, people expect miracles. A mother pulls at your sleeve, begging you to look at her infant. The baby is limp, its tiny face dotted with the telltale buboes. You perform your ritual. Inspect, avoid touching, mumble the usual phrases. You want to help, but there's nothing in your bag of dried herbs and half-baked theories that can. You move on, your heart a little heavier, your steps a little slower. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls again. More dead. More work. Back at your quarters, you strip off your gear with the care of someone disarming a trap. You scrape off dried blood and God knows what. Hang your beak mask to air out and flop onto a cot that smells faintly of mold and old despair. You stare at the ceiling and wonder if tomorrow will be better. It won't. But you'll still get up, still don the mask, and still walk into the fire like it's your job. Because it is. You wake before dawn, again. Your body aches, and your mouth tastes like candle smoke and regret. You fumble in the darkness, finding your uniform by feel. Heavy boots, thick leather gloves, and the infamous waxed cloak stiffened with who knows what. You pull on the beak mask last, the stale scent of vinegar-soaked herbs wafting up your nostrils like a bad memory. This is your plague doctor's suit, designed more to terrify than to heal, and as protective as wrapping yourself in wet parchment. Historians still argue whether this costume was meant more to protect you from disease or just to keep everyone else at arm's length. Either way, it gives you the silhouette of a giant, deeply unhappy raven. You shuffle toward the door, trying to remember if you even ate dinner last night. Doesn't matter. Time to get to work. Again, the suit is hot, itchy, and smells vaguely of mildew and goat. The long robe is meant to be waxed against miasma, the bad air people think carries the plague. They haven't discovered bacteria yet. But by medieval standards, this is cutting-edge science. Kind of like building a sandcastle to stop a tsunami. Beneath the cloak, you wear trousers stuffed into high leather boots, supposedly to prevent flea bites. You would have preferred armor, or a giant steel hamster ball. The gloves are snug and lined with fabric, and by mid-morning, your hands will be swimming in your own sweat. Still, better that than touching a bubo with your bare fingers. And then there's the mask. Oh, the mask. Long, curved, and sinister. It juts from your face like a bird's beak, because it is modeled after one. Inside the hollow beak, you stuff dried flowers, myrrh, rose petals, mint, and anything else vaguely pleasant-smelling. The theory is that sweet smells protect you from the plague by overpowering the foul miasma. It's sort of like walking through a battlefield wearing a cologne counter. You breathe through 2 tiny holes near the beak's tip, which makes every inhale sound like a dying accordion. Visibility is awful. You have to turn your whole head to look left or right. Peripheral vision, not in this economy. The quirkier tidbit. Some doctors went a step further and carried small bouquets in their hands or wore amulets shaped like frogs or toads, believing these items could absorb the illness. One guy supposedly tied live chickens to himself. You can imagine how well that went. And yes, the infamous stick. You carry it like a royal scepter or a magical wand. But it's really just for poking people, their pillows, and sometimes the bodies you're not sure are entirely dead yet. It keeps things at a safe-ish distance, assuming you believe a 3-foot wooden rod can hold back a microscopic army of death. You glance at your reflection in a shop window, if you're lucky enough to find an intact one. You look like some kind of monstrous bird god. No wonder people scream when you walk by. No one sees a healer. They see a funeral omen in boots. Still, this uniform makes you official. When you show up, people step aside. Doors creak open. Patients accept your presence, even if they're not thrilled about it. And if someone questions your methods, you can always say you're following the wisdom of Hippocrates, or Galen, or that one herbalist whose scrolls smell faintly of opium. Your first stop today is a merchant's house near the city square. You clomp through the streets, drawing stares from windows and alleyways. A child points and whispers. A dog barks and then backs away whimpering. The city has quieted since the outbreak began. But there's still enough noise, bells ringing for the dead, carts creaking with fresh lumber for new coffins. You reach the door and knock. 3 short raps with your stick. No one answers, but you hear coughing inside. You push the door open. The air is thick and sweet-sour, like spoiled wine and sweat. You step in and announce yourself, voice muffled behind the mask. The merchant lies on a chaise, his limbs twitching, eyes wild. He mumbles something about rats and judgment. You crouch to examine the swollen buboes in his groin. They're black and shiny, pulsing with fluid. You feel your stomach twist, but you've seen worse. You pull out a sachet of herbs, hold it under his nose, and pray it does something. Anything. Spoiler, it doesn't. Historians debate whether any part of this getup offered real protection. Some say the waxed robe helped keep flea-carrying rats at bay, while others think the thick fabric only delayed the inevitable. A few argue that plague doctors survived longer because they kept their distance, not because of the mask, but because of their habit of not touching things. Imagine that. The merchant's wife approaches, clutching a rosary. She offers you wine, which you decline. You're trying to stay lucid. And besides, your beak makes drinking a logistical nightmare. Outside, the sun is climbing. You adjust your gloves and wipe condensation from the inside of your eye lenses. They're always fogging. It's like trying to perform brain surgery in scuba gear. A fun fact, some of the earliest plague doctor designs had tinted lenses, supposedly to protect your soul from the evil you might see. You just wish they'd invented anti-fog. Another house, another visit. This one has a dog barking non-stop until it sees you and hides under a table. The patient here is already gone, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. You whisper a blessing, though you're not entirely sure what faith she followed. Religion doesn't matter much anymore. The plague doesn't discriminate. It takes priests, merchants, children, even the mayor's cousin, though that guy probably had it coming. You emerge back into the street, cloak fluttering slightly in the breeze. A passerby makes the sign of the cross. You nod politely, though inside you're wishing you'd taken up woodworking or joined a monastery in the Alps. You trudge on, boots leaving faint prints in the dust. Somewhere, a town crier bellows out the latest list of dead. Your name isn't on it, yet. You adjust your mask again, trying to dislodge a bit of mint that's tickling your nose. Your breath echoes softly within the beak, a rhythmic reminder that you're still alive, still breathing, still fighting, even if your armor is made of scented lies. Your boots strike the cobblestones with a dull rhythm, the stick tapping beside you like a metronome for misery. You're already 2 houses deep and haven't even gotten to the part of your job that's least likely to involve actual medicine. That's right. Being a plague doctor in the 14th century means doing a whole lot of not doctoring. Mostly, you're a glorified human scarecrow with a fancy stick and zero expectations of saving anyone. But hey, at least you've got that beak. Very professional. Your next stop isn't a patient. It's the city square. Today you've been asked to supervise a plague pit burial. This is less of a medical task and more of a crowd control situation, since families tend to scream when they realize you're dumping their loved ones into a communal trench with little more than a prayer and a handful of lime. You arrive to find the pit already half full. The bodies are wrapped in linens, or sometimes not at all, and piled like forgotten laundry. The grave diggers are complaining about sore backs and low pay. You nod in understanding, though you're privately wondering if they've noticed the black patches on their arms. You make a mental note to check on them tomorrow, assuming they're still breathing. A town official waves you over. He's one of the few people who doesn't flinch at the sight of your mask anymore. In fact, he seems slightly comforted by your presence, like a child clinging to a haunted teddy bear. "Just stand there," he mutters, makes them think someone's in charge. So you do. You stand tall, looming in your dark robes like the angel of vaguely informed death. And you watch. Families weep, some shout. One woman tries to jump into the pit after her brother. You gently block her path with your stick. That's right. This is your job now. Guardian of the plague pit. You didn't study anatomy for this. Not that you studied much of anything. Historians still argue whether plague doctors were ever expected to cure the sick. Some say they were hired more as bureaucrats, to keep records, tally the dead, and make sure nobody started setting bodies on fire in the street again. That happened once. It didn't go well. You leave the square with the scent of lime and sorrow clinging to your cloak. No one thanks you. They never do. At best, they stare. At worst, they throw things. You once got hit with a fish, not even a fresh one. Next stop is a noble household, much fancier than the cramped wooden hovels you usually visit. You knock with the tip of your cane. A servant opens the door just wide enough to look terrified. "She's upstairs," he whispers. You ascend the steps, each one creaking under your weight. The hallway is quiet, lit only by flickering candles and the occasional moan. You find the lady of the house in her bedchamber, surrounded by dried flowers, her skin pale and blistered. Her lips twitch into a faint smile when she sees your mask. You wonder if she's delirious or just hopeful. You perform the usual routine, offer a sachet of herbs, check her pulse with gloved fingers, and try not to gag at the smell of her wounds. Her maid stands nearby, clutching a vial of holy water. The atmosphere is more seance than surgery. You prescribe a compress of vinegar-soaked cloth and suggest opening the window. Whether this is medical advice or just a desperate plea for fresh air is up for debate. Either way, the maid nods solemnly. Quirky tidbit. Some plague doctors believed in mirror therapy, placing mirrors around the sickbed to reflect the illness away. Others tried astrology charts to determine the best time to administer remedies. Because clearly, Saturn's mood swings are the key to recovery. Back on the street, the sun is high and the stink of the day has ripened. You pass a baker who gives you a wide berth, muttering something about cursed feathers. A group of children trails behind you at a distance, daring each other to touch your shadow. One throws a pebble. You raise your stick, not to strike, but to wave them off. They scatter, laughing nervously. You sigh. Not because of the kids. Honestly, that's the most normal thing that's happened today. But because you've still got 2 hours of rounds before your evening tally. Yes, that's another part of the job. Every night, after the sun sets and the rats reclaim the streets, you sit by candlelight and scratch down names in your ledger. Who died, when, what symptoms, who they lived with, how many others in the house are sick. Sometimes you just write everyone. It's faster. One evening, you notice a name you've seen 3 days in a row. A family of 6, now whittled down to 1. You wonder if you should visit again tomorrow, or if it's already too late. You wonder a lot of things. Do these masks actually work? Are the flowers doing anything besides soaking up sweat? Is anyone surviving because of you, or in spite of you? Historians debate whether plague doctors were more harm than help. Some suggest their presence provided structure in a society unraveling at the seams. Others argue they simply served as a visible sign of despair, walking proof that things were very, very bad. You end the day at the edge of the city, near the livestock pens. A small farmhouse has requested your presence. You find an old man inside, wheezing and covered in bruises. His daughter stands over him, clutching a tattered herbal manual. She looks at you, hopeful. You try. You apply a mustard poultice. You offer a tincture of elderberry and vinegar. You say the words you're supposed to say, and then you leave. Outside, fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. You pause, letting the cool air hit your face through the beak's small vents. For a moment, the world seems quiet, peaceful even, and then the wind shifts, and you catch the unmistakable scent of rot. You walk back to your quarters in silence, each step echoing like a closing door. You remove your gear piece by piece, laying it out carefully to dry overnight. Your hands shake slightly as you reach for the ink and ledger. Another list of names. Another tally of sorrow. You light a single candle and whisper to yourself, still breathing. It's not a prayer, just a fact. And in this job, that's something. You wake to birdsong. Not the sweet, gentle kind, but a guttural, throaty racket from a flock of crows picking through yesterday's waste in the alley. You roll over, groaning as your joints protest another day in a waxed body bag of an outfit. Your mask lies on the table, staring at you with its glassy eye holes, beak still stuffed with yesterday's herbs. You sigh. Time to restock. Time to pretend you have a plan. You start the day with your usual rituals, splashing your face with cold water, sharpening your stick to a polite but firm point, and refilling the beak with a fresh bouquet of rosemary, cloves, and dried orange peel. It smells almost pleasant, until you remember where you'll be wearing it. Today's going to be experimental. Not in a fun way, like a new bread recipe. No, today you're going to try some cures. You know they won't work. But people expect you to do something, and let nature take its awful, festering course doesn't fit well on a prescription slip. You make your first stop at a thatched cottage down by the river. The patient is young, maybe 14. His mother meets you at the door, pale and hollow-eyed. You duck through the doorway, knees creaking, mask scraping the low frame. Inside, the boy is writhing on a straw mat, his face covered in sweat and streaks of blood. You do the standard check. Feel his forehead, look at the buboes under his arms, each one swollen like rotten plums. Then you pull out the latest recommendation from the medical minds of your time. Sliced pigeon. That's right. You take a bird, cut it open, and place its warm, very dead body directly on the buboes. Historians still argue whether this bizarre method came from some ancient medical logic or just plain desperation. The theory goes that the disease would transfer from the human to the animal, like the world's worst game of tag. You'd know it was working if the pigeon died quickly. Spoiler alert, it always died quickly. The boy flinches as you set the bird down. His mother doesn't say a word. You stay a while, watching, waiting, pretending. When the pigeon expires, you remove it gently and offer a mix of crushed garlic and vinegar for the boy to drink. He tries, coughs, and gags. You nod solemnly. That's the reaction you expected and feared. Back on the road, you update your mental checklist. Sliced pigeon, not magic. Garlic syrup, disgusting. Up next, bloodletting. You visit a young priest next, barely older than your own apprentice, if you had one. He's lying on the floor of the chapel, covered in a tapestry with a faintly saint-shaped stain. His breaths are shallow. He looks up at you with glassy eyes and croaks, "Is it the end?" You give him the best answer you can. Maybe, but not yet. You set up your tools, a bowl, a small knife, and a linen cloth. Then you slice the vein at his elbow, just enough to draw a slow stream. You catch the blood and watch his face. Some say letting out the bad humors will bring balance back to the body. Others think it just brings death faster. Quirky tidbit. One particularly ambitious physician once tried bloodletting through a patient's foot while hanging them upside down. That guy was definitely not invited to the next guild meeting. You sit with the priest until the bleeding stops. He's cold, pale, and barely conscious. You bind the wound and offer him a sip of boiled wine. That's another cure. Maybe the alcohol kills the plague, or maybe it just numbs you enough not to care. Later in the day, you try poultices made from crushed emeralds and onion, burned herbs smeared into open sores, and, your least favorite, leeches. You hate leeches. They're slippery, stubborn, and unnervingly enthusiastic about their job. One sticks to your glove, and you spend 5 minutes flicking it off like a panicked toddler swatting a spider. People ask you questions. Is it working? Will he live? What do you see in the sores? You answer with soft words, calming tones, and vague reassurances. You don't tell them the truth, that none of it works, that you're just pulling ingredients from an invisible bag of desperation and hoping one sticks. You end your rounds at a household with 4 children, 3 sick and 1 already gone. The mother insists on prayer before you begin. You nod and stand awkwardly in the corner, beak tilted toward the ceiling as she mumbles through the Latin verses she half remembers. Then you kneel and begin applying a rosewater poultice to the youngest child's feet. You whisper soft words to her, even though she's unconscious. You don't believe in miracles, but you still say them. Outside, the clouds have thickened. Rain begins to fall, soft at first, then pounding. You pull your cloak tighter around you, though it's already soaked through. You step into a tavern to dry off, earning a few startled looks. The barkeep offers you a mug of ale. You accept, knowing it'll taste like sour bread. But it's warm, and you need that. A man stumbles toward you, face red, eyes wild. He shouts, "You're killing them, not saving them," and throws a handful of coins at your feet. You don't answer. You bend, pick up the coins, and slide them into your pouch. They might buy more herbs, or pigeons, or wine. Historians debate whether plague doctors were ever trusted. In some towns, they were seen as holy. In others, they were feared. Rumors said they brought the plague with them, that the mask spread death, not blocked it. There are stories of towns where doctors were attacked, driven out, even hanged. You believe them. You leave the tavern in silence, walking into the rain. Your mask drips, your robe clings, you're exhausted, and your satchel is lighter, of remedies and of hope. You try to remember the last time a patient survived. You can't. Still, you walk on. By now, you recognize the city by its smells. They change subtly as you pass from one district to another. Dung and smoke near the tanners, brine and old fish by the wharf. And in the richer quarter, the unsettling perfume of rotting bodies beneath lavender sachets and lavender lies. But one thing never changes. Death follows you like a second shadow. Today it's worse. You pass a bakery with its windows shuttered. The usual scent of baking bread has vanished. A red X marks the door, drawn hastily with ochre and fear. You pause for just a moment. You treated the baker's son 3 days ago. Gave him a vinegar compress, sprinkled him with rose petals, whispered something comforting you don't remember anymore. You didn't expect a miracle, but it still stings. You move on, stick tapping the ground, the sound blending with the quiet rattle of your own breath inside the mask. You enter the poorer district, narrow lanes that twist like intestines, lined with crumbling buildings and puddles of something that is definitely not water. A rat scurries across your path. It pauses, stares at you boldly, then vanishes into a crack in the wall. You consider saluting it. At least one of you knows exactly what it's doing. The door you've been looking for is already open. A woman stands just inside, arms crossed, eyes puffy. "They're all inside," she says. You nod, step over the threshold, and into a room that smells like hay, sweat, and despair. 4 family members lie on mats spaced just far enough apart to make you wonder if someone's been reading Aristotle. 1 groans, 1 doesn't move. 2 blink up at you with identical expressions, fear barely restrained by hope. You start with the mother. Her buboes are large, black, and oozing. Her fever's high, and her breath comes in short, wet bursts. You clean the sores, apply another round of herbs, thyme and vinegar this time, and gently tilt her head to help her drink. She gulps, then gags, then drinks again. Her husband mutters something about bad humors and leeches. You nod, non-committally. You've done both today already. You're not convinced either helped. Historians still argue whether bubonic plague could have multiple strains, some slower, some faster. The rapid version, pneumonic plague, didn't even need fleas. It spread from person to person through coughs and shared air. In a home like this, with bodies packed close and windows sealed shut, it's a death sentence. You move on to the daughter. She's young, maybe 6, and her small body trembles with each breath. You check her eyes. They're glassy but alert. You try a syrup made of elderflower and honey. Not because it will help, but because it's all you have that tastes remotely kind. Then, the brother. He's already gone cold. You hadn't even reached him before he slipped away. You say nothing to the family. There's no need. The mother closes her eyes. The father begins to pray. The sister keeps staring at the ceiling, whispering a song. You leave quietly. Back on the street, the mood is shifting. You feel it. The people are afraid. But it's changing into something else. Not panic, not sorrow. Something heavier. Something angrier. You hear it in the whispers. This is a punishment. The Jews poisoned the wells. The stars are angry. The doctors don't care. You pass a public well where a small crowd is gathered, arguing. Someone points to the sky. Someone else points at you. You keep walking. You've learned not to make eye contact when the mood starts to curdle. At the next house, no one answers the door. You enter anyway. A cat darts past your legs and vanishes. Inside, the walls are scrawled with crosses. A single candle burns low on the floor. The body lies beside it, half covered with a torn cloak. You kneel, whisper a quick rite, and gently close the man's eyes. You don't know his name. No one will come for him. You write "unknown" in your ledger. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, people believed cats and dogs spread the plague. Thousands of animals were killed. Ironically, it was the rats they should have been worried about. But hey, science takes time, like 300 years of time. You wander past the marketplace, where booths stand empty and food rots in crates. A man hawks miracle amulets from beneath a torn tarp, charms shaped like bones and feathers, guaranteed to ward off pestilence. A woman buys 3, clutching them to her chest like they're made of gold. You stop at the edge of a small chapel. Inside, a monk chants softly, his voice echoing in the cold stone. He pauses when he sees you, then nods. You sit in the back, silent for a moment, just breathing. The incense is thick and spicy, stinging even through your mask. Historians debate whether this era of widespread death reshaped spirituality. Some became more devout, others abandoned faith entirely. And then there were those who whipped themselves in the streets, begging forgiveness from an uncaring sky. You've seen them. You try not to watch. Night falls as you make your final visit. A small girl meets you at the threshold of a home with no light inside. "My mama's sick," she says. "Will you fix her?" Your heart does a slow, painful twist. Inside, the mother lies curled in a chair. You kneel beside her. She opens her eyes, just barely, and whispers, "Thank you." You nod, clean her hands with rose water, and pull the blanket up to her chin. Then you turn to the girl and ask her name. She tells you, and you write it down. "Stay close to your mama," you say. "Talk to her. Tell her stories." You don't promise anything. You don't lie. Outside, the wind is picking up. It howls between the buildings like a warning. You pull your cloak tighter, adjust the beak, and make your way back through streets gone quiet. Lamps flicker in upper windows. Somewhere, a bell tolls once. You glance at your hands. They tremble just slightly as you pull out your ledger. You write, 2 deceased, 5 critical, 1 unknown. You pause, then add, 1 child, no symptoms. Yet, you close the book and you sit still for a while. Then you do what you always do. You breathe, and you wait for tomorrow. The sun creeps over the city like a guilty secret, casting long shadows over rooftops and streets still slick from last night's rain. You step out into the quiet, your cloak heavy on your shoulders, your mask already damp with breath. Today's list is long, and the air feels thicker than usual, like the city itself is holding its breath. The first call comes from a modest home in the Weaver's Quarter. The smell hits you before you even reach the steps. Musty wool, human waste, and the unmistakable sweetness of death. You knock softly with your cane, no answer. You nudge the door open. Inside, it's dim and silent. Dust dances in shafts of morning light. In the main room, a woman lies on a pile of flattened rushes. You kneel beside her and feel her neck. Warm, still. Her eyes flutter open, clouded and distant. "I waited," she murmurs. You nod slowly, even though you just arrived. It's a phrase you've heard before. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they die mid-sentence. Sometimes they just stare at you, too far gone to speak. You do what you can. Clean the worst of the sores. Anoint her lips with a vinegar and honey tincture, and whisper a few reassuring nothings. She drifts back into unconsciousness. You pull her blanket up and take one last look around the room, and that's when you notice the corner. A child, barely old enough to walk, sits there wide-eyed and silent, clutching a wooden spoon like a sword. No visible signs of illness. Yet, you squat down, mask tilted toward him. "What's your name?" you ask. Your voice muffled but gentle. He doesn't answer, just stares. You leave food from your satchel, dried bread, a bit of cheese, and gesture for him to stay put. You'll try to return, but deep down, you already know. Back outside, the city is waking. Slowly, reluctantly. Bells ring from the churches, not for mass, but for mourning. Again. You pass a cart filled with corpses, piled unceremoniously like firewood. The driver, An old man with one good eye and a limp waves at you as if you're old friends. You nod back. You've seen him every day this week. The next call takes you to a wealthier home near the old guild hall. The woman who answers is clean, composed, and possibly in denial. She leads you upstairs to her husband, who lies in bed with a cloth across his forehead and a bowl of posies beside him. I gave him the herbs, she says quickly, and the vinegar, and the toadstones. You resist the urge to raise an eyebrow. Toadstones. Those are actually fossilized fish teeth. But people believe they neutralize poison. Another comforting lie in a house full of them. You examine the man. Feverish. Buboes under both arms, breathing shallow. You try a mild bloodletting, slicing gently into the forearm and catching the blood in a silver bowl. It pools there, dark and sluggish. His wife watches, wringing her hands. She's already made her choice, magic stones and prayers, but still called you. Just in case. You offer her advice. Keep the windows open. Burn Rosemary, isolate him. She nods. You're not sure if she's listening or just needs you to say something that sounds like control. Historians still debate how much plague doctors actually practiced medicine versus how much they simply served as witnesses. Grim clerks of the apocalypse. In cities like Florence and Avignon, they were given legal contracts to stay, often forbidden from leaving. But help came in many forms, writing death tallies, supervising burials, or just showing up with a mask and a stick so people felt less alone. You continue your rounds, moving from house to house. You're careful not to enter unless necessary, careful not to touch unless absolutely required. That's part of the unofficial rule book. Stay distant, stay alive. Your stick does more than poke patients. It opens doors, lifts sheets, and occasionally shoos away over-curious cats. It's a tool of inspection, a pointer, and sometimes, when tempers run high, a warning. Once you used it to fend off a man who tried to blame you for his wife's death. He was swinging a shovel and shouting about your witch mask. You didn't speak. You just held your ground. He ran off eventually, but you still check behind you now. You pause at midday to eat, seated under a half-collapsed archway near the chapel. Bread, hard cheese, and a flask of watered-down wine. You lift your beak slightly to sip through a narrow straw, an awkward ritual that never feels dignified. A couple of passing townsfolk cross themselves as they see you, whispering behind their hands. Quirky tidbit. Some plague doctors were believed to be immune, either blessed by God or cursed and untouchable. One Venetian record claimed a doctor survived 3 outbreaks, though it's unclear whether that's true or just comforting folklore. Others weren't so lucky. Some died within days of arriving, their fancy robes and beaks offering as much protection as a wet napkin. You wrap up your meal and head to the outskirts, where a small farmhouse waits. You've been here before, an old couple, childless, stubborn. They'd refused help last time, waving you away with pitchforks and muttered Latin. But now they've sent for you. You arrive to find the man in bed, barely breathing. The woman sits beside him, hands folded. She looks at you and nods, just once. You perform the ritual. Herbs, compresses, prayers. She asks for leeches. You comply. As you leave, she presses something into your gloved hand, a silver coin and a dried sprig of lavender. For the journey, she says. You thank her with a bow. You don't mention that the journey only goes in one direction these days. The sky is dimming when you return to your quarters. You peel off the mask slowly, the suction sound faint and wet. You place it carefully on its hook and sit, sore and silent by the fire. Your cloak hangs heavy on its peg, dripping with the memories of a dozen doorways and 24 faces. You open your ledger. Ink, quill, scratch, scratch. 4 dead, 7 treated, 1 child uncertain. You sit in the dark a while longer, the room quiet but not peaceful. Outside, another bell tolls. You can't remember if it's the 5th or 6th today. You close your eyes. Tomorrow there will be more houses. By this point, you don't even dream. You just collapse. Sleep is less a restful escape and more like someone hitting your off switch. You wake in the same position you fell asleep in. The fire long dead, your legs tingling from not moving for hours. Your body feels brittle, like you might crack if you stretch too hard. You shuffle to the water basin and splash your face. Cold, sharp, necessary. You pull on your underlayers, your gloves, and finally your heavy cloak. It still smells like yesterday. So does the mask. The herbs inside are stale, but you shove more in. Lavender, cloves, dried marjoram. The result is a spicy bouquet of desperation. Your belly growls, but there's no time for breakfast. You chew a piece of hard cheese on your way out the door. It's like eating a waxed shoe. Today's route will take you into the city's southern quarter, where the streets narrow, the buildings lean, and hope has been noticeably absent for days. Your list includes 8 names, a few addresses, and one ominous note scrawled in someone else's hand. Possible house collapse. Check structure first. You begin the walk. It's cold this morning. Your breath fogs the glass lenses of your mask, and you have to stop to wipe them clear. Again. If there were a profession less suited for physical exertion than this one, it might be mime, or perhaps medieval scribe. At least they got to sit down. You reach the first home. You recognize it. You've been here before. The woman who lives here lost her son last week. Now it's her husband. You brace yourself. Inside, it's dim. The window has been nailed shut from the inside with a tapestry draped over it. You gently push it aside, letting in a blade of light. The man lies on a low cot, sweat soaking through his tunic. His wife sits beside him, arms folded tightly across her chest, like she's holding herself in place. "I boiled the water," she says, not looking up. "Just like you said." You nod, though you never said that. Someone else must have. You kneel and begin the inspection, check the buboes, clean the sores, apply a vinegar-soaked cloth to his forehead. You offer a few sips of rosemary tea. It won't help, but it tastes like something alive. As you pack up, the woman touches your sleeve. "Will it help?" You pause. "It might," you say, which is your way of telling the kindest possible lie. You leave quietly, 1 down, 7 more. The next few houses blur together. You move mechanically, check, clean, compress, murmur. Every time you think you've seen the worst of it, the plague shows you it still has range. One man's tongue is black and swollen, protruding like a rotten plum. A girl's legs are covered in a strange, weeping rash. Another patient is found half naked in the street, moaning about angels and bleeding from the eyes. You do what you can, which is to say, not much. By noon, you've done 5 visits and haven't eaten. You try to take a break in a covered alley behind the church, but a woman finds you there, clutching her baby and sobbing. "Please," she says, "just look." You do. The baby is red-faced and coughing, but no buboes, no black skin, just a fever. It might be the flu, or it might be the early signs. You don't know anymore. You give her a cloth soaked in elderflower and lemon balm. "Place this on his chest," you say gently, "and keep him warm." She nods like it's a spell, like you've just handed her salvation in fabric form. You wish that were true. Later that day, you finally arrive at the possible house collapse. It's leaning badly, like it's about to whisper something to the street before toppling over. You knock, and no one answers. You peer through a crack in the door. Inside is chaos. Broken furniture, a tipped water jug, dried blood on the floor. But no bodies. You back away slowly. Whatever happened there, it's over now. Historians still argue whether entire families sometimes fled mid-outbreak or were taken so quickly they simply vanished. Some records suggest neighbors often looted abandoned homes before the officials could seal them. Others say people were too terrified to even touch the doorknob. You pass by a group of men digging a trench, not for plumbing, for bodies. They nod as you walk by. One offers you a flask. You decline. Drinking on the job has its appeal, but falling over in a beaked mask is a great way to die unceremoniously. You check your notes. 2 more homes to visit. One of them is near the fishmongers. You groan quietly. That street always smells like hot sadness and fish guts. Sure enough, the air gets heavier as you near it. The patient here is a teenage boy, son of a merchant, now lying shirtless on a table surrounded by jars of old spices and 3 worried siblings. You examine him. The signs are clear. Classic bubonic swelling, high fever, shallow breathing. His older sister keeps asking questions you don't answer. What if we burn Rosemary? What about letting blood from his leg? Should we call the priest now or wait? You want to say yes to all of it. But instead you hand her a bottle of prepared balm and say, "Rub this on his feet." Then keep the room quiet. It won't cure him, but she'll feel like she's doing something. And that matters too. You finish your route just before dusk. Your satchel is nearly empty. You've handed out your last sachet, your last rose water, your last clove-studded cloth. All you have left is a half-crushed lavender bundle and a coin someone gave you by mistake. You head back to your quarters, the stick clicking on the cobblestones. It's quieter than usual. Fewer carts, fewer people, fewer signs of life. You reach your door and sit just inside, not bothering to undress yet. Your legs hurt. Your back is stiff. Your head feels like it's packed with wool. You realize you haven't had a full meal in 2 days. Quirky fact. Some plague doctors brought their own cooks, literally hired someone to prepare and test their food daily, fearing poison or contamination. You've got a chunk of cheese and a prayer. You eat. You write in the ledger. Your numbers are worse than yesterday's. Again. You think about the woman with the baby, the collapsed house, the empty street, and still you breathe. Still, you'll do it all again tomorrow. The morning light filters through your small window in hesitant rays, dust motes swirling lazily in the air like tiny spirits you're sure are both watching and judging you. You've got that familiar ache behind your eyes, the dull throb of exhaustion that won't quit no matter how many times you blink. Your hands are cracked from constant washing. Your throat raw from talking through that damn beak. And yet, you dress again in your plague doctor suit, your armor, and your prison. Money is on your mind today. You're paid a small fortune compared to most, but only if you live long enough to collect it. Most plague doctors before you didn't. They fell like the rest, coughing, sweating, sinking into pits or shallow graves with barely a goodbye. You're no stranger to risk. The town council hired you because you were desperate. And desperate makes you brave. Or stupid. Maybe both. You think about the months you spent learning to read a few Latin phrases, studying ancient texts, and practicing the tedious art of bloodletting. All to land this cursed job. You tighten your gloves and run a hand over your beak. This ridiculous mask is your signature and your curse. You've noticed some townsfolk whispering about the bird of death, some saying you're a witch in disguise. A few even claim the mask carries the disease, not wards it off. Great PR. Your first call today is a merchant's home near the docks. The air smells of salt, smoke, and rot. You knock, and a pale man answers. His wife lies inside, feverish and delirious. You set to work with a practiced routine, checking buboes, applying herb compresses, and offering sips of pungent vinegar tonic. She doesn't speak much, but her eyes flash when you touch her wrist. You're certain she hates you, or what you represent. You collect your fee, promised by the merchant if his wife improves. You can't help but wonder how many coins you'll actually see. Historians still argue about the economics of plague doctors. Some say they profited handsomely, preying on the desperate. Others suggest most barely scraped by, constantly outspent by the cost of herbs and supplies. In truth, it was a lottery. Sometimes you got paid, sometimes you got cursed. You move on to a cramped hovel. The patient is an old man, coughing and shivering. You try to comfort him, though you know comfort doesn't cure. You apply a poultice made of crushed marigold and onion, muttering that it'll ease the pain. You hear whispers outside, neighbors debating if you're a saint or a sinner. The plague makes people irrational. It's easier to blame a face in a mask than the invisible fleas carrying death on their backs. You pass by a group of children playing at a safe distance. One dares to approach, tossing a handful of dust at your boots before darting away. You smile beneath the mask. It's the closest thing to normal you've seen in weeks. Your next patient is a priest, lying in a darkened room filled with candles and incense. He's pale and weak, but still clutching his rosary tightly. You check his pulse and apply a bloodletting procedure, hoping to balance the humors. The priest thanks you, his voice barely a whisper. You leave his house feeling heavier, the weight of so many dying souls settling deep in your chest. Back on the street, you run into a colleague, another plague doctor in a similar beaked costume. You nod, acknowledging the shared misery. He jokes about the suit being a medieval hazmat outfit, but you're not in the mood for laughter. Quirky fact: some plague doctors carried small bells attached to their belts, intended to warn people of their approach so they could avoid the bird of death. You don't have one. Maybe that's why people throw things. Your day stretches long and hot. Sweat pools inside your gloves, your feet ache. Your vision blurs behind the lenses. But you keep going. You have to. At day's end, you tally your earnings. It's enough for a few more days of supplies and maybe a crust of bread. Not enough for comfort, not nearly enough for peace of mind. You remove your mask carefully, placing it on its hook to air out. You wash your hands with vinegar and water, though you know it won't stop the fleas. You sit by the fire, writing in your ledger. 3 treated, 1 died, 2 unsure. You breathe deep. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, because someone has to. The medical texts you carry are ancient, worn, and filled with advice that ranges from the outright bizarre to the dangerously misguided. You leaf through faded parchment pages, each scribbled with diagrams of veins and organs that look more like art projects gone wrong than helpful guides. Bloodletting, purging, and leeches. These are the weapons of your trade. Weapons you wield with grim determination, even though deep down you suspect they might be doing more harm than good. Today you set out with a small kit strapped to your waist, a rusty lancet, linen cloths, a bowl for blood, and a vial of mystical vinegar. You know every drop of blood you draw weakens your patient further, but you do it anyway. It's what the texts say to do, and so it must be right. Or so you tell yourself. Your first patient is a merchant who coughs so violently you can hear the rattle in his chest before you even reach the door. You enter carefully, mask filtering the thick, sour air. His skin is pale, almost translucent, and dark blotches mar his neck and arms. You locate a vein and carefully make a small incision, watching as the blood pools and drips into the bowl. Historians still argue whether bloodletting actually helped plague victims or hastened their deaths. Some suggest the practice was a cruel ritual, while others argue it was a desperate attempt to restore balance in a world gone mad. You fall somewhere in the middle, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. You clean the wound and bandage the arm, feeling a pang of guilt. The man's eyes meet yours, full of fear and something like hope. You wish you could tell him this would end, but you can't. Next, you visit a woman whose buboes have burst, leaving her skin raw and weeping. You apply a poultice made from crushed onions and honey, explaining that it might draw out the poison. She winces but says nothing. You wonder if she's too sick to care or simply resigned. Quirky fact: some plague doctors believe that applying animal parts, like powdered crocodile dung or slices of toad, could cure the disease. You've seen jars filled with such remedies in the homes you visit. And while you try not to gag, you understand that hope comes in many forms. You move on to a young man whose breath smells of decay. He's barely conscious, mumbling prayers to saints you don't know. You don't join him in prayer. Instead, you focus on cleaning his sores and applying a compress soaked in vinegar and rosemary. Later, you sit in a tavern, exhausted and grim. A few patrons eye you warily, murmuring about how the doctors bring the plague. You ignore them, sipping your ale through a straw, trying to keep the bitter taste down. You remember the ancient texts again, the writings of Galen and Hippocrates, passed down through centuries, but woefully unprepared for a pestilence like this. Their humoral theory, balancing blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, feels archaic, but it's the only framework you have. You wonder if, centuries from now, some future doctor will look back at your efforts with the same mix of pity and disbelief. Your body aches, your throat is sore, and your heart feels heavy. Yet you prepare for tomorrow, knowing the plague doesn't sleep. Neither can you. You tuck your lancet away, wrap your cloak tight, and sit by the fading fire, watching the shadows dance on the walls. Outside, the city holds its breath once more, and you wait. The air hangs heavy with a strange mix of incense, sweat, and something that smells like burnt garlic. The ever-present reminder that people are desperately trying to fight an invisible enemy with whatever they can find. It is a scent that clings to the nostrils, both a comfort and a curse, a paradox of hope and decay that permeates every corner of the city. You step carefully through the streets, your boots barely making a sound on the uneven stones, worn smooth by the many feet that have trod before you. The early morning light casts long, wavering shadows from the crooked rooftops and chimney stacks, a pale, sickly yellow that does little to dispel the gloom. Every house you pass bears its own story of loss and fear, etched into peeling paint, cracked windows, and hastily scrawled crosses on doors. The crosses, some crudely carved into wood, others painted in rush strokes of charcoal or ash, serve as grim markers, silent testaments to the lives taken or spared by the plague's relentless grasp. The city feels like a patchwork of suffering and endurance, stitched together by whispered prayers, desperate remedies, and the faintest flicker of human will to survive. You know better than most that this plague isn't just a disease, it's a crisis of belief. People look for reasons, to explain the chaos, to find someone or something to blame. In a world turned upside down, certainty becomes a rare and precious thing. Some point to bad air, the miasma, they call it, spreading like poison through the city's narrow alleys and crowded homes. The idea of invisible vapors, laden with filth and disease, drifting silently on the breeze, fills the lungs with dread. Others say it's divine wrath, a punishment for sins too numerous to name: blasphemy, greed, heresy, lust. The church bell tolls endlessly, not just for the dead, but as a summons to repentance, a call for the living to wash their souls clean in blood and tears. A few whisper darker theories: poisoned wells, cursed relics buried beneath hallowed ground, or even witches dancing under the moonlight in the shadowed woods outside town. These tales spread like wildfire, stoked by fear and superstition, each accusation another brick in the walls of paranoia rising around the city. You carry none of these beliefs. Your mask, A grotesque beak stuffed with herbs and vinegar-soaked cloths filters the air. Your stick keeps distance between you and the sick, a barrier both physical and symbolic. Your herbs, thyme, rosemary, sage, barely mask the stench of decay and death that clings to the city like a shroud. But you understand the power of belief, how it can comfort or destroy, how it can bind a community or tear it apart. You have seen devotion turned to fanaticism, mercy twisted into cruelty. You arrive at a small chapel on the edge of town where a group of flagellants have gathered. Their slow, sorrowful procession winds through the streets, the rhythmic whipping of their backs a stark counterpoint to the city's silence. Their faces are streaked with blood and sweat, eyes glazed with fervor and exhaustion. They march and scourge themselves in public penance, hoping to appease a God who seems silent, to draw divine favor or mercy. You watch quietly from the shadows, knowing their pain is as real as the plague itself, their suffering both a protest and a prayer. Historians still argue how much religious movements like this shaped public responses to the Black Death. Some say they helped communities cope, offering ritual and meaning amid chaos. Others think they fanned the flames of hysteria and division, inspiring violence against perceived enemies, the scapegoats who bore the blame for the suffering. Inside the chapel, you meet a priest who has been ministering to the sick and dying. His face is pale and lined, eyes hollow from sleepless nights and too much sorrow. He speaks to you softly, telling stories of miracles and despair, of faith tested and lost, of hope flickering dimly in the darkest hours. You nod, offering what comfort you can, though your words feel hollow even to your own ears. The plague does not discriminate. It takes the righteous and the wicked, the wealthy and the poor, the young and the old. It leaves behind silence and grief, the cold absence of breath and heartbeat, and a lingering question of why. You move on to your next patient, a woman whose eyes are bright with fever and fear. Her family believes the stars are responsible, pointing to a recent planetary alignment as the harbinger of doom. You do not argue with superstition. Instead, you apply your usual remedies. Vinegar compresses to cool her burning skin, herbal tinctures made from elderflower and honey to soothe her throat, and whispered prayers for strength, though the words seem to dissolve into the thick, humid air. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval doctors consulted astrologers to determine the best times for treatment, believing that celestial movements influenced health. You wonder if they'd be surprised to learn how close to the truth they were, just for reasons they didn't understand. The heavens indeed wield power over life and death, though not in the ways they imagined. Outside, the city's tension thickens like the fog that creeps through the streets at night. You hear rumors of violence, neighbors turning on neighbors, accusing each other of witchcraft or betrayal. Fear breeds suspicion, and suspicion breeds chaos. You keep your head down, avoiding eye contact as you pass a market square where a man shouts about poisoners among them. A crowd gathers, angry and restless, faces twisted with rage and desperation. Your last visit is to a family who has barricaded themselves inside their home. You are allowed a brief glimpse, a father clutching his wife's hand as she weakens, children huddled in a corner, their faces pale and drawn. You offer what you can, herbs, advice, and a promise to return. Whether that promise means anything anymore is uncertain. As dusk falls, you make your way back to your quarters, the city's noise dimming to a haunting quiet. You remove your mask carefully, the faint scent of herbs mingling with the day's sweat and sorrow. You write in your ledger, the words heavy on the page. Many suffer, some pray, few survive. You sit by the fire, feeling the weight of so many lost souls pressing down. Tomorrow you will return to the streets, to the sick, to the dying. Because in this world, the plague doctor is both witness and warning. a symbol of a time when hope was as fragile as the thin veil of your beak. The city's damp air clung to your skin like a shroud, heavy with the sense of rot, smoke, and despair. You had walked these streets countless times, your waxed cloak trailing behind, boots worn thin but still steady, your masked face a symbol both feared and pitied. The beak was packed with herbs, rose petals, lavender, cloves, supposed shields against the invisible enemy that crept through the alleys and hovels. Yet here you were, feeling the first cruel whispers of sickness stirring beneath your ribs. At first, it was barely noticeable. A fleeting chill that you dismissed as a trick of the wind or exhaustion from days spent wandering the city's labyrinthine streets. But then, your fingers brushed against your forearm, and you felt it. An unnatural weight, a dark spot swelling just beneath the thin glove. You froze, heart pounding, the blood seeming to halt in your veins. You bent your head, peering at your skin through the cracked window of your glove. The spot was small, almost innocuous. A bruise, perhaps? The mark of your relentless work? But no. It pulsed with a life of its own, spreading slowly like a stain across ancient parchment. You averted your gaze, the pit of your stomach twisting into a knot of dread. The mask, once your armor, now felt like a coffin lid pressed tight against your face. The sweet aroma of herbs inside the beak had lost its power, replaced by the stench of sickness that invaded your lungs with every breath. The stick you carried, a companion, a weapon, a symbol, felt suddenly useless, a fragile talisman against an unstoppable tide. Your breath came in rough, rasping bursts, each inhale a fight against the tightening grip of fever and cough. You remembered tales whispered in dark corners, stories of plague doctors who had fallen, their bodies found collapsed in shadowed alleys or abandoned courtyards, their masks cracked, their sticks broken, swallowed by the very pestilence they sought to conquer. A quirk of history you recalled, bitter as the tinctures you administered. Some doctors believed their garb made them invincible. The beak filled with potent herbs, the long waxed robe, the gloves, they were shields against death itself. But many paid the ultimate price for this folly. One famous doctor, whose name faded into obscurity, died within days of donning the mask, his broken shell left to rot beneath the silent gaze of a cold moon. You pressed on, ignoring the mounting dizziness and pounding headache that throbbed like a drum behind your eyes. You had to. The city depended on you, on the flickering hope your presence brought, however faint. Yet your hands trembled uncontrollably when you scribbled in the ledger, the names and numbers blurring into an endless litany of loss and despair. What did your family think? Did you even have one you had long since shed the life of a husband or father for this lonely pilgrimage through shadow and death? You were a ghost cloaked in wax and shadow, unseen and unloved. The townsfolk's gaze hardened. They no longer saw a healer. They saw a harbinger. Whispers followed you. He's cursed. The doctor is dying. Keep away. Their fear was palpable, a tangible barrier as real as any stone wall. One night, the city's cruel hand finally claimed you. You collapsed in a deserted alley, the cold stones biting through your thin cloak. Your stick fell from your grasp, clattering softly. Darkness closed in at the edges of your vision as you lay there, gasping, your thoughts drifting to a girl you'd tended weeks before, her wide, trusting eyes now a distant memory. Did she survive? Did anyone? Historians debate whether plague doctors were doomed or if some eluded fate by luck or solitude. The truth has been lost beneath the dust of centuries, buried alongside the names of the brave souls who wore the mask. You hear distant bells tolling mournfully, their echo a dirge for the living and dead alike. Your lips part, a silent plea forming, a cry for mercy, for meaning, for the end. Then, darkness. You awake, if that's the right word, in a haze that feels like sinking through a thick fog. The edges of your vision swim with wavering shadows, and sounds reach your ears, muffled, as though you were wrapped in layers of wet cloth pressed tight against your skull. The air tastes stale, thick with the scent of damp stone and something fouler, a lingering reminder of the sickness that grips the city. Your body aches as if a dozen horses had trampled you in the night, your limbs heavy and uncooperative. Each breath comes shallow, rasping, as though your lungs themselves struggle for air. Yet despite the weight pressing on you like a tombstone, you know you are alive. Somehow, that is both a blessing and a curse. Outside your small, grimy window, the city rages on. The muffled clamor of distant bells rises and falls, a cacophony of mourning and ritual. Some toll solemnly for the dead, marking their passage into the shadowy beyond. Others ring to summon the living to prayer or to labor, a harsh soundtrack to the endless struggle for survival. The plague does not rest, and neither do the desperate souls who stagger beneath its yoke. You try to rise, to sit upright, but your muscles betray you. They refuse to obey the commands you send them, weighted with the fatigue of fever and despair. You lie back down, the heavy cloak discarded somewhere in the gloom. The waxed mask with its grotesque beak, once a talisman in armor, is gone. You feel exposed now, vulnerable, your pale, sweat-slicked face marked by the cruel imprint of fever. Your mind reels backward, grasping for the days before the sickness took hold. You recall the heavy suits of waxed cloth, designed to repel the miasma thought to spread disease. You remember the pungent herbs stuffed into the beak of your mask, lavender, rosemary, cloves, an aromatic barrier against death. The wooden stick you wielded, to keep the terrified at bay, to ward off more than just the sick. Those memories seem like the life of another man, another time. A faded dream from a past too distant to grasp fully. You remember the homes you entered, the smells that clung to every corner, thick with human misery. The pungent scent of sweat, rot, and desperation. The tears shed quietly, prayers whispered in tongues you barely understood. The children clutching wooden spoons as if they were swords against the invisible enemy. The old man muttering about sins and God's wrath. The noblewoman's last weak smile, a fragile defiance in the face of oblivion. A curious thought flits through your fevered mind. Some plague doctors kept detailed journals, desperate to leave behind records of their efforts, hoping future generations might glean wisdom from their failures. But most of those accounts were lost or destroyed, swallowed by the chaos or deliberately erased. All that remains are fragments of a nightmare few wish to remember. Your thoughts turn to the city's public health measures, or the glaring lack thereof. The misguided officials who banned cats and dogs, oblivious that by killing off natural rat predators, they might be worsening the plague's grip. The town criers who shouted warnings in voices hoarse with fear, messages that most failed to understand or ignored outright. The fearful crowds, frayed by hunger and loss, turning on neighbors, seeking scapegoats to blame in a world unraveling. Historians argue whether these early quarantine efforts were effective or if they merely served as instruments of social control. Some credit the city gates and travel bans with slowing the plague's march. Others see these acts as desperate gestures, feeble attempts against a force that no gate or guard could stop. Your thoughts drift to your fellow doctors, those who wore the mask before you, and those who will don it after you. Some fell quickly, taken by the very sickness they fought. Others vanished into obscurity, their names lost to time. A few became legends, their waxen masks preserved in dusty museums or whispered about in the tales of survivors. You wonder if your story will ever be told, or if you will fade like a shadow, a whisper lost in the din of history. Outside, a soft rain begins to fall, tapping gently against the window pane. For a moment, the world seems to hold its breath, quiet and fragile beneath the gray sky. You close your eyes and let that peace wash over you. You breathe, slow and steady, riding the fragile waves between consciousness and oblivion. The plague still lurks beyond your door. The city still suffers, wrapped in the cold embrace of death and fear. But for now, you rest. The plague doctor's life was a relentless push and pull between duty and survival, between the desperate hope to heal and the ever-present risk of death. Each morning dawned like a gauntlet thrown down, a summons to face the sick, the dying, the despairing, and to do so cloaked in wax and herbs, armed with a wooden stick and a mask that both concealed and defined you. You stand at a crossroads, a choice that gnaws at your mind and heart. To flee the nightmare that has swallowed the city whole, or to stay locked in its suffocating grip, mask donned and heart heavy. Many chose to flee. Stories drifted through the streets and taverns, whispers of doctors who slipped away under cover of darkness, abandoning their posts, their patients, their duty. Some vanished into the countryside, chasing the hope that fresh air, wide-open fields, and isolation might be a shield against the invisible scourge. Others disappeared entirely, swallowed by the chaos, by fear, by the merciless hand of death or angry mobs who blamed doctors for bringing the sickness in the first place. But fleeing was never a simple matter. You signed a contract, a solemn oath, sealed with ink and pressure, binding you to the city and its people. The local lord who hired you demanded your service, and desertion was met with harsh penalties. Rumors told of doctors caught fleeing, dragged back and punished publicly, branded cowards and traitors, their names blackened in the chronicles of the plague's ravages. Some were said to have met the sharp edge of a sword. Others, worse fates, whispered in fearful tones. You consider your options, weighed like stones in a scale. To run is to survive, but to abandon your post is to forsake your charge and your conscience. To stay is to face the plague head-on, risking everything, your health, your sanity, perhaps your very soul. A quirky, bitter fact comes to mind. In some cities, plague doctors were required to carry official letters granting them safe passage and access to homes, proof of their grim duties. But these papers, fragile as they were, did little to protect them from angry villagers who saw the mask not as salvation, but as a curse. Armed guards enforcing quarantine scowled at the doctors with suspicion and hatred, treating them like prisoners as much as protectors. Your thoughts are shattered by sudden commotion outside your quarters. You peer cautiously through the grimy window and see a small group gathered. Town officials, citizens, and guards, faces etched with fear, fury, and exhaustion. Their voices rise and fall in heated argument, voices sharp as knives cutting through the night's stillness. The plague has frayed the city's nerves to breaking. Rumors swirl like poisonous smoke, whispered fears of witches who conjure death beneath the moon. Poisoners who taint wells and food, conspiracies too monstrous to name. The atmosphere is electric, charged with suspicion and dread. You recognize some of the voices. Neighbors who once greeted you with warmth now glare with accusation and hate. The mask you wear, once a symbol of hope and protection, has become a target for their rage and fear. The tension coils tighter, palpable and dangerous. You wonder if tonight will bring violence, if broken windows and bloodied streets will mark the hours to come, or if the fragile order that holds this city together will endure a little longer, like a candle flickering against an encroaching storm. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. the weight of it pressing down like the burdens you carry inside. You grip your stick firmly, the familiar texture grounding you. Because there is no other choice. Historians still debate how plague doctors balance their roles. Part healer, part record keeper, part enforcer of quarantine. Some saw themselves as saviors, risking everything to bring relief to a suffering populace. Others knew they were instruments of control in a time of overwhelming fear. Agents of the city's grim attempt to hold chaos at bay. You think of the faces you've seen. Those racked with pain, the tear-streaked mothers clutching dying children, the proud and terrified nobles who reached out for your care despite their privilege. You recall the whispered prayers, the curses, the fearful glances, the gratitude given in whispers and tears. And the ledger you carry, heavy with the names of those who lived and those who died. The tally of a war waged in silence and shadow. Outside, the city breathes with a tension that could snap like a taut bowstring. The night deepens, thick with unseen menace. You step out into the dark. The familiar scrape of your boots against stone, a quiet drum beat in the stillness. The beaked mask conceals your face, hides the flicker of fear in your eyes. Your cloak trails behind, a shadow among shadows. Tonight, you will face the plague once more. The plague had finally begun to wane. It was not with a bang, nor even with a whispered sigh, but with a slow, reluctant retreat, like a shadow pulling back at dusk. The city, once thrumming with the panic and sorrow of an unstoppable scourge, now lay in a fragile silence that pressed down heavier than any cry or lament. You walk through the emptied streets, your boots stirring dust where life once bustled, your cloak brushing against the cracked stones slick with the residue of rain and neglect. The usual clamorous noise of merchants hawking wares, children chasing each other with careless laughter, and townsfolk bartering loudly, is gone. Instead, the silence is broken only by the distant caw of crows perched atop empty chimneys and the occasional creak and groan of abandoned carts left to rot in alleyways. Many homes stand empty, their doors yawning open like dark mouths or tightly nailed shut against curious eyes. Windows are shuttered or boarded over, panes shattered long ago and replaced with rough planks that offer no comfort. Gardens once tended with care now grow wild. Thick weeds twist through cracked stone paths, flowers wilted and choked beneath the thorns of neglect. Vines creep up walls like greedy fingers reclaiming what was lost. The marketplace, the city's heart and soul, is a ghost of its former self. Wooden stalls sag under the weight of rotting crates, fruit and vegetables rotting in piles left untouched. The scent of decay mixing with the faint memory of spices and fresh bread long past. No laughter echoes here. No songs rise on the wind. Only the stillness of absence. You pause at the edge of a mass grave, a yawning pit dug hastily in a field outside the city walls. It is enormous, a pit swallowing hundreds of bodies with no ceremony, no reverence. The earth is freshly disturbed, uneven and settling slowly as rain soaks into the soil. Nearby, a small wooden cross leans crookedly against a clump of dirt, crudely inscribed with names you do not recognize, names already fading into oblivion. Your heart clenches as you recall the faces behind those names. The child clutching a wooden spoon in trembling fingers, eyes wide with fear yet holding on to hope as though it were a lifeline. The merchant's wife, fevered eyes bright even in death, who begged for mercy and relief until her breath ceased. The priest who whispered prayers softly until his voice failed, and silence took its place. All gone now, swallowed by time and earth. The city's survivors move cautiously among the ruins of their lives, haunted by what they've witnessed. Some set about rebuilding, their hands shaky but determined, trying to coax life back into the tired stones and empty streets. Others wander like ghosts themselves, faces hollow, eyes distant, spirits broken by loss. The air is thick with grief, an invisible shroud wrapping every corner of the city. The lingering scent of decay, damp earth, stale cloth, and faint ashes, clings to the bones of the streets, a reminder of what once was and what might never be again. You, too, are changed. The years spent beneath that heavy waxed cloak, the suffocating mask stuffed with pungent herbs, the endless fear that haunted every step and breath. It has worn you down. Your pockets are empty, stripped of coins and herbs alike. Your heart is heavy with memories you cannot lay to rest, and your mind is a tangled web of regrets and haunted recollections. Historians still debate the true impact plague doctors had on those dark days. Did their efforts save lives? Or were they mere witnesses to an unstoppable disaster? Did their presence bring comfort, or did the beaked mask become a symbol of death itself? A grim omen that cast a shadow over hope. You consider your own legacy. Will you be remembered as a healer, a figure of courage standing against the tide of death? Or as a harbinger of doom, a man lost and swallowed by history's relentless tide? Or will you fade into oblivion, just another name lost in the dusty pages of forgotten chronicles? A quirky tidbit surfaces in your thoughts. The iconic beaked mask, once a practical tool filled with fragrant herbs to fend off miasma, eventually became more theatrical than medicinal. Long after the plague's grip loosened, the mask found its way into carnivals and plays, its sinister shape a symbol of mystery and fear rather than healing. You fold your ledger carefully, the worn pages filled with names, dates, and notes better left untold. The stories it holds are heavy, a burden you carry silently. As the sun dips low behind the distant hills, casting long shadows that swallow the city whole, you turn away and walk toward the horizon. The city shrinks behind you, a place of sorrow and survival, of death and fleeting hope. Tomorrow is uncertain. The future, a blank page waiting to be written. But for now, you carry the weight of survival. Time softens the sharp edges of your memories, like rain smoothing cobblestones worn by countless footsteps. The once vivid terror, the cacophony of cries, the scent of decay and despair. These have faded into echoes, distant and muted. Yet the imprint remains, etched deeply into your soul. Your beak mask, once a terrifying emblem of dread and mystery, now rests in dusty museums or faded paintings, a curious relic of a world struggling to understand itself. Visitors gaze upon its grotesque silhouette, marveling or recoiling, unaware of the sweat that soaked the lining, the exhaustion behind the eyes that once bore it. It is a symbol frozen in time, half legend, half ghost. You wander through the echoes of your own story, tracing the faint footprints left by those who came before and those who would follow. The narrow, twisting streets you once paced ring with ghosts of voices, pleas for mercy, whispered prayers, curses spat in frustration. You think about the families you visited, fragile and broken, the prayers murmured over fevered brows, the names written in your ledger, the tally of life and death weighed in ink and sorrow. You recall the moments when hope flickered, brief and fragile as candlelight struggling against a storm. A child's weak smile before slipping away. A mother's grateful clasp of your hand as you offered what little comfort you could. The fleeting glance of a survivor who returned to the world, carrying scars both seen and hidden. Historians still argue about your role, whether plague doctors helped stem the tide or merely stood witness to an inevitable flood of death. Some see you as pioneers, the first tentative steps toward modern medicine. Others brand you as symbols of fear and misunderstanding, walking caricatures in grotesque costumes that offered little real protection. The truth, like the tangled alleys you walked, is complicated. You were healer and witness, comforter and harbinger. Your efforts were imperfect, sometimes futile, yet underpinned by a courage that few could comprehend. Your mask, your most famous feature, has transcended its time. It appears in plays, festivals, and stories of horror, its long beak and hollow eyes a symbol of mystery, power, and dread. People do not remember the fatigue that drove you, the hot, suffocating weight of the suit, the constant fear, or the countless failures and losses. They see only the shape, the mask, and imagine an icon rather than a man. You smile softly, knowing the real story is messier and far more human. Now, as night settles gently around you, you sit quietly in the fading light. The noises of the world diminish to a gentle hum. Soft whispers of wind, the distant call of owls, the rustling of leaves. Your breath slows, steady and calm, releasing the tension that never quite leaves your bones. You let go of the weight you have carried for so long, just for a moment. You remind yourself that you did what you could, with the knowledge, the tools, and the courage you possessed. You were neither hero nor villain, but a man caught in a storm beyond imagining. The plague may have taken many, but it did not take your spirit. The mask may have been a lie, a fragile shield against the unknown, but your heart was real. You close your eyes and drift into rest, carried gently by the night. Good night, weary traveler. Sleep well.